The request I had about tonight was you all want to know what you can do. So I have some focus on that toward the end. I do what I call Human Trafficking 101. And basically what we know is there are two primary forms of human trafficking. One is commercial sex trafficking, and the other is labor trafficking. And I think, Vicki, I sent you the handouts. So there is a fact sheet available, and there will be a website list available that you may already have. So you kind of don't have to take a lot of notes unless you want. True, both commercial sex trafficking and labor trafficking, they require one of three things: force, fraud, or coercion, except when the victim being exploited is younger than 18 years old, and any child who is exploited in any way is considered trafficked. And why is there human trafficking? It is a very lucrative business. It is the second fastest growing illegal industry in the world. It is outpaced only by only by drugs. And it is illegal. It is not legal in any country. And it makes last year approximately $152 billion worldwide, 9.8 billion in the United States. Hackers do not like people like us who try to interfere in their business, because obviously they're in it to make money. Trafficking is driven by greed, power, and consumer demand. If no one wanted to exploit anyone, we wouldn't have the problem. We also know that anybody can be a trafficker, anybody can be a buyer, and anybody can be a victim. And one of the stories I like to tell on that is I was doing a presentation at Mother McCauley High School, Chicago, which is a Sisters of Mercy school. And I had a PowerPoint going with pictures of potential traffickers, which I lifted off the internet. And I put the slide up and the girls burst out laughing. And I thought, oops. Turned out that I had Snoop Dogg's picture up there. So it was a good opportunity, one, to think on your feet, but secondly, to be able to say he is not what he could be. Traffickers can be male, they can be female. Some children are trafficking other children. Gangs traffic, usually younger people. It can happen anywhere, and it can happen to anyone. A lot of people think it's only going to be an international thing in very poor countries or major cities or wherever, but it happens everywhere. A video I use with high school kids shows a young girl who is in advanced studies, very good grade average, going to go to nursing school. And she came she was small town Minnesota, came very close to being trafficked. Fortunately, somebody intervened when they saw that it was not what it should be. Usually with teens like that, it can be, I have this really cool boyfriend, don't tell anybody. It's just something for parents, grandparents, and guardians to be paying attention to. I also talk to kids about not keeping secrets for their friends. I'm going to tell my mom I'm at your house. Well, don't do that. Don't get caught up in that. Traffickers generally control their victims through violence, through threats, and through drugs. They basically take the victim's control away from them. You can eat now or you can't eat. You will go out and work now. You won't work now. You will live here, and so on. Some of the risks that we know exist, or you might call root causes of human trafficking. Poverty is a major problem. Persons who are vulnerable or desperate or disadvantaged, can be taken advantage of. The note I always make at this point is if a child is going away and has no safe place to go, they will be picked up on the streets within 48 hours. So again, when I'm talking to groups, particularly kids, if you know someone's going to run away, or you're thinking about running away yourself, you don't have a safe place, don't do it. If your friends are running away, help them find a safe place, see what kind of intervention you can do. Pornography is an issue in terms of risk. Kids as young as 8 and 9 are now watching pornography. And one of the problems with porn is they see it, then they want to experience it. They will find websites where they can connect with persons who would provide them either visual or actual experiences. Traffickers use pornography to force their victims to do some of what they see in porn. So pornography is very anonymous generally for the buyer. So they can enter through that. It's also one of the primary ways that children are exploited. The other thing we know about children who are victimized is they usually, if they're being sold, are worth more than an adult. And I read one statistic that if a young child is trafficked, they probably live only about 7 years. So it's a very, I don't even know what word, tragedy isn't even a strong enough word. It's a very insidious kind of thing. Traffickers use a lot of manipulation. And in the prayer, they talk about being lied to, and that's essentially what happens. The other primary problem we have today is social media. It is the primary hunting ground, both for the buyer and for the seller. And with all of our kids on virtual learning, there are more and more of them out online, more and more of them looking around, see what's out there, making connections. Predators are paying attention. And I talk with kids, well, adults as well. What are you posting on social media? What apps are you using and what are you putting up there? We talk about sextortion, which is graphic language. Sexting is graphic language. Sextortion is what the predator will use. Oh, I saw you online. You're really, really cute. Why don't you do this for me or do that for me? If the victim refuses, the trafficker will say something like, well, if you don't do that for me, this is what I'm going to do to your sister. This is what I'm going to do with that picture you posted, or something similar. So there's a threat involved in that. So we look at then, how do we begin to solve the problem? What are essential towards solving the problem? And one of the things is education, awareness building, and advocacy. I spend my time, I do not work directly with survivors, but I do spend most of my time doing education, currently by Zoom, but also in person when that's possible. And that can include awareness building. What we know, Polaris Project, for example, is the primary collector of data in the US. Well, they do some international too. And it's based on, they sponsor or host the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So the stats they have are based on what comes in on the hotline. What we know is the number of people calling the hotline has increased in the last several years. And who is calling in has changed. So we're seeing more calls from victims themselves, victim families, not-for-profits, interested or people from the public who have seen something and don't know what else to do. They can call the hotline. The national hotline has resources everywhere. So and it's open 24/7. And if you call and say, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, I have a victim I need to move away from her predator, who can I contact? Now, I will talk a little bit about COVID too, because one of our problems with COVID is the shelters numbers are reduced because of social distancing and protecting and safety. So there are fewer shelter beds. There aren't enough to start with, but there are fewer. And so the victims often are left with their predator. Same thing is true for domestic violence victims. If there is not a place for them to go, what do? Locally, I have a colleague, her name is Chris Wade, and Chris is a survivor herself. She has been working with women on the streets for years. And I was talking to her about 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, how are things going? She said, well, I've had 16 women test positive for COVID. I've had 4 women die from COVID. I've had 5 women murdered. I don't have anywhere to take victims. And I really can't be much out on the streets with them because it's not safe because of COVID. So she said, and we don't have enough money to put them all up in hotels and motels. So folks who are working at the street level, that's some of what they're dealing with. So a big thing for us is prevention. How do we keep not only kids, but other adults from being lured into being trafficked or being tricked into being trafficked, whether that's sex trafficking or labor trafficking? How do we reduce the demand? And one of the ways to reduce the demand, we believe, is to increase the punishment of people who are buying and selling the victims, so that there would be more severe fines, higher severe punishment by imprisonment. So those are kind of some of the key things. So I want to stop and ask if you have any questions. I have a bad habit of just talking and going. Dave, need to unmute.
I am unmuted. Labor trafficking. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, but I was watching a series, editorial series, kind of a documentary on a news station. And I miss it to which one it was. I'll look that up, but they were talking about how big food, like we get grocery stores. We get all this wonderful food that we go and get and easily spend our money. And we're not aware that these big, huge agri businesses actually go like to Nepal and, South Asia, and they seduce people by saying, you give us $5,000 now and you can come over here and we'll take care and we'll get you an immigration. If you can talk a little bit about labor trafficking and how we unknowingly participate in that. They also talked about how government officials are involved in that as well. So, I mean, it's insidious, as you said. There's a current lawsuit out, I know that.
Yes, thank you for the step right into what's coming next.
You might want to take other questions then.
No, I wanted to talk about labor trafficking because we seldom do. When you say trafficking, human trafficking, everybody almost automatically goes to sex trafficking. And what you're saying, Dave, is absolutely true. We know there are trafficked persons in hotels, they're in restaurants, they're in the farm fields, they're in the factories. I mean, in the US, we don't have quite so many in factories as you will find overseas, but we have farm workers who are trafficked. We have hotel workers, we have restaurant workers. I have a whole PowerPoint, but it's not all on labor trafficking. But again, and part of the problem with trafficking, particularly if there are persons brought into the US, they take their documents. This is in either form of trafficking. They can actually get out, then they're stymied because what do? They don't have documents, they don't have passports, they don't have anything. Labor trafficking can also include debt bondage. It can include involuntary child labor, can include child soldiers. Now that's, again, soldiers are more in Europe. The food, clothing, look at the tags in your clothing. Where was it made? Part of our problem with labor trafficking in the US is consumer demand. We want a lot of products and we don't want to pay a whole lot of money for them. So what company is going to get those produced, companies, plural, because it's happening in multiples. So they go overseas, usually, for the clothing industry. And then everything's produced inexpensively and then sold over here. So that is a major problem. Where we say about that is fair trade. So if you can get certified fair trade products, buy locally, go to your farmers markets. Now some of you live in places where that's easy to do probably year round. In Kansas City, we do it late spring through the summer, early fall. Now to make the rest of you jealous, it was 72 degrees here today.
Yeah, right. I was going to say that.
Yeah, but do that, buy local produce. Doesn't have to necessarily be organic produce, but buy locally. Where are your strawberries coming from? Where are the peaches coming from? Where are the oranges coming from? Who's picking them? Almost every banana we see in the store comes from Guatemala. Are they trafficked? Well, see if you can find out who's producing it. The other concern with places like hotels, motels, restaurants, the workers, a hotel may be contracting with someone and the hotel, motel, restaurant may not know that their workers are trafficked because it's a third party. We have seen kids, when I lived in an apartment complex up north, there were this little group of boys came around selling. Yeah, there were about 4 or 5 of them. I suspected that they were being trafficked. And all I could do is locally call law enforcement and say that this was happening. And they have to follow up. We do have people training law enforcement. It's an important element so that if someone is being picked up, particularly prostituted women, that they aren't immediately determined to be felons, which is true usually in Missouri. And if you have a record, you have a hard time getting another job or a place to live. Prostitution is not work, okay? Some people talk about it in terms of saying, that's my work. It is not work. I know no prostituted woman who does that voluntarily. If they're out on the street, it's because they're forced to be or they're desperate or have absolutely no other skill to support themselves. So fair trade example, we have CRS, Catholic Relief Services, SERV, SEERV. They provide fair trade. In Kansas City, the roastery coffee shop has fair trade certified coffee. The owner goes directly to the producer and buys the beans. I only know that because I know him personally. Partners for Just Trade. Equal Exchange is primarily coffee, chocolate. Catholic Health Association has a flyer, and I don't have an example with me, of how bad can a chocolate bunny be, is the question. It can be really bad if it's produced by forced labor. They're promoting, obviously, fair trade chocolate. But we got those posters and kids get permission to post them around the school and what have you. A couple of other examples. I don't know if you can see this. It's Saxom. And Saxom is a jewelry company, a clothing company that, again, you can look, it's SAKSAUM. And I could send Vicki some of these websites if that's helpful. But there again, some of these are women who are survivors who are producing a product, so that there's a way for them not to have to go back to being trafficked, particularly young people who are taken into trafficking. They don't have any other skills. So if they get out, what do they do if there's not someone available to teach them skills? Partners in Just Trade is another one. These people are pretty savvy. You can find them on the internet. You can find them on Facebook, Twitter. This one is Trades for Hope, or Trades of Hope. And again, these happen to be all women, but again, in many ways, women are the wage earners. So those are some things that you can do. What I always suggest to groups, Mark, when you were talking about volunteering at a shelter, who are your local partners that you can collaborate with to begin to address issues, whether it's domestic violence, homelessness. Homelessness leads right into trafficking. Almost every social justice issue intersects with human trafficking. Example, when people are flooded out, yeah, somebody just posted 10,000 villages. Thank you very much, Rita. It's in Old Town Overland Park. They're also online. They have all kinds of products. I have to stay out of the store, basically. But what they do every year before Christmas is they invite not-for-profits, and 20% of what they take in goes to the not-for-profit who comes and spends the day there. So wherever you are, I'm not familiar with Florida or resources in Florida, but you all, I'm sure, have not-for-profits who are working to address some of these issues. So partner with them. The other thing I say to people, particularly when we're talking about sex trafficking, but it would be true in any trafficking, do not personally go out there and try to intervene. It's dangerous for you and it's dangerous for the victim. Truck stops are a major problem. They're absolutely the worst, our state's worst because we have interstate highway. All interstate highways are a problem. That's the primary way that victims are transported. Now, generally, we do not find them in the back of semis, although that has happened. But they are transported across the major highways. Truckers Against Trafficking are a group. They're an organized, well-organized group of truck drivers who have materials in all the truck stops. You will also find little signs posted in bathroom stalls. I've seen them in airports, and you will see them sometimes in rest areas with the national hotline number on them, so that if a victim is able to get in there, they may be able to call. A primary problem with victims is traffickers either themselves personally keep close contact, or they have somebody in their group, we call it a stable, which is a really terrible term, of victims that is the highest level for the group who is out there keeping watch. We see that a lot in healthcare. Any of you in healthcare, nurses, primarily in the emergency room is where you're going to see them. And the goal is to separate the victim from the perpetrator, the trafficker, because a victim will not talk to you if their trafficker is present, because there will be repercussions when they go back to where they're living. So if you can say, well, I'm sorry, we have to take her up for an x-ray and you're not allowed on that floor, might give the victim a chance. So it's things like that. Nowadays, it'd probably be some of the urgent care clinics that would see some of the victims. And also do advocacy. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Northland Coalition
Yes.
in North Kansas City? North,
Yeah.
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 They're working on, they've been working on the human trafficking. But then I think COVID just kind of, put
Yeah.
a stop to those things. But they were trying to get that started up here in I haven't heard any more what they're doing with it.
Yeah, most of them, the only one that seems to be pretty active is the one that's coming out of the Western Missouri District Attorney's Office. And we are meeting. There's several churches that have some groups that started and then COVID hit and they just have kind of flattened out. Platte County Health Department had a really good group going and that is not active at the moment.
If you're familiar with the television program, The Resident, they had a story on just that, with a woman coming in and he just wouldn't leave her, and he was just, and they suspected that, and they tried to get, just like you said, well, we've got to take her somewhere, for a test, then you can't come. And they had that on the program, the story on the program.
The other thing they're encouraged to do is make a follow-up appointment so that the person has to come back, whether that's for sexual trafficking or labor trafficking. Because again, labor trafficked persons are not working under the best of conditions. And one of the things, I belong to the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. There were 15 of us, been almost 7 years now, who founded that organization. And it is now a not-for-profit. We have hired an executive director who's an awesome laywoman, and we're now the board. So that, we begin to, and we're national. So it's 15 different women religious communities throughout the US. And some of them are working directly with victims in safe houses. We have one woman who's on the board who is a chaplain to women. So, it's a whole variety of people. But those are the larger kind of coalitions trying to address the issue. And there's a young man in our area whose primary work is to address or talk to kids in junior high, middle school and high school. And then
Jeanne, I'm sorry. I had a quick question for you. Hopefully it was a quick question. You talked about that one of the strategies to help is to increase the penalties for people who are arrested for trafficking. What is the current status? It's not, you never hear about that.
Yeah, there's right now getting any kind of legislation out there that does that is pretty minimal. Everybody's focused on a lot of other things. We were successful in legislation in the state, at the state level, to get, if it's a young woman who has been picked up on the streets, she's considered a felon, to get that expunged from her record so that going forward, she is not bound by that. But yeah, changing some of the rest of that, it's an uphill fight. We always support any of the legislation that's aimed at reducing violence against women. Mostly it is at the federal level. And we have on our website, the U.S. Catholic Sisters website, there's a way for when there's something to be acted on, it comes up on the screen on the website. And that website, I think, is on the list that you have. What else?
Sister Jeannie, I have a quick question. You said that there were some church groups that were starting up, but COVID stopped them. What were they starting to do?
Well, the one I was active with was they had pulled together faith groups. So it was a whole mix of religious groups. Looking at how can we collaborate so that we're not duplicating what somebody else is doing, that we know who's out there. So if I have a victim who needs help and church A can provide that, then I can directly refer that person to that church. The goal was to have strength in numbers primarily, and then to work on legislation and educational programs, and meeting needs. Problem with, like your group, somebody said a service project, find out what they need. So do they need, like somebody who's helping victims, do they need food? Do they need shelter? Do they need clothing? Do they need toiletries? What do they need? I can do that with my colleague Chris down here, but I don't know your area and I don't know how close together any of you are in order to do that. A lot of church groups can do that. They just need encouragement. The other thing that's important, your parent, grandparent, guardian, be informed, continue to learn about the issue, talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids, talk to your siblings, whoever. If you're in a church group and there's a youth group, see if you can't talk to the group. Informing them. I talked to a high school group in Omaha at our high school. It's a girls' school. And when it was over, one of the sisters said to me, "Jeanne, you scared them to death." I said, "Well, that wasn't the goal, but maybe it'll help." So I say to kids, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to tell you what it is so that knowledge is power. And if you know, then maybe you can avoid being trapped. So those are some key things for parents, grandparents, guardians. Do you know what your kids are doing on their cell phones, on their iPads, on their computers? Have you been able to block what you don't want them on? Where are they at night? Are you keeping those electronic things in a safe place? Be a good idea if you didn't. One of our groups promotes cell phone contracts between parents and kids so that they agree they can be on it so many hours and talk to so many people, and the parent has some responsibility and they hold each other to that. Communication is a key thing for protecting kids. That's kind of overall. Good for me, it's half an hour. Anything else you'd like to know, want to know, I can help you explain. Yeah, Gabina.
I have a question, sir.
Yep.
Quick question on these international trade agreements. Don't they try to put language in there to prevent this, or they really don't want to prevent it?
Well, generally speaking, yes, we want to protect it and prevent it. There's probably someone somewhere who doesn't, but generally, yes. The other thing, at the federal level, there is a department whose primary focus is trafficking in persons. It's the name of the organization. And they produce a document every year called the TIP report, Trafficking in Persons report. And they rank every country based on how they are addressing human trafficking, what is the transparency in the supply chain, so that they're rated from A to F, I think it is. And there are a few countries that are 1 to 5, few countries that are really good. Most countries fall about the second level. A few countries are on watch. They don't even rate them. And some of them are not doing what they should do. Absolutely. The Department of Homeland Security, which sounds real weird, I know, has a program called Blue Campaign. And it is, the whole point of it is to address human trafficking. And they produce materials that are really pretty good, and they're in multiple languages. So finding Spanish language materials is getting a little better, but then we look at Can we get language like Vietnamese, French, Portuguese, and so on? There are coalitions worldwide, like the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, that fall under an umbrella called Talitha Kum, which comes out of the larger women's religious organization in Rome. And those coalitions are collaborating among each other. So that, again, it's a broader scope of looking at how do we control human trafficking. Gambino, you had a question?
Yeah, I know that it became sort of popular to call a human trafficking modern day slavery, but I know that recently at a gathering that you had, somebody spoke about that issue and said that that was not the most appropriate term, because when you're dealing with our history of slavery here, for many of the African American people, that they feel that, for instance, our prison system is a continuation of their history of slavery and our economic system and so forth. Can you speak to that a little bit?
That is absolutely true. I don't even probably need to expand on what you said. I do have a link again, which I could share with Vicki and get it sent out. It's on my email, so I can't get to it. But it's an entire article on that topic. And it is to be more respectful about slavery as it directly impacts our African American Black community. It's also why we don't any longer use the word to abolish it or be abolitionists, because again, it's a direct tie to that era. We also are trying to get rid of words like pimp and John and call them predators, traffickers, buyers, because it better defines who they are.
So Sister Jeannie, how would you, one of us out on the street, how could we recognize that something like that is going on?
Well, there are several ways you can kind of recognize. It's not as easy probably on the streets, but you would find, for example, a woman or two standing in a particular zone. Now, most cities, like in Kansas City, if you're on Independence Avenue or Troost, you will be likely to see women who are being prostituted. And generally speaking, you can tell looking at them, not always, but sometimes you can. But when you see a woman close up, maybe she's by herself or she's with another person, the woman's looking at the floor, she does not speak. If questions she's asked, someone else answers for her. She may look pale, she may look like she hasn't eaten for a while, she has not slept well. Her hair may not be well kept. Or she could have the reverse of that, where she's way inappropriately dressed. 14-year-old who's in heels and a mini skirt and barely anything on the top with way too much makeup. That's a pretty obvious thing. They are not always that obvious. But generally, particularly with healthcare, we talk about what the appearance of a person is. With hotel people, we talk about someone comes in. Let's say Dave comes into the hotel and he has 3 young women, obviously not his daughters, and they check in, they go to the hotel room or rooms, and the only person you ever see again is Dave, because the girls never leave the rooms. So that whoever is buying the girls coming in. So again, it's watching the traffic. What do you see? Truck stops, very often the victim will go up to the trucker, knock on the trucker's window and say, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And then the trucker can answer that question. And again, if you see that, do not walk up to them and intervene, because traffickers don't like us interfering in their work. But do call appropriate authority. I talk to kids about being in the mall. Predators shop a lot on the internet, but they will also stroll around the malls, and there are always groups of kids in malls, or at least there used to be. I don't know about post-COVID, but how they respond to that person approaching them will make a difference. So the predator picks out somebody, one of the girls, that looks like there's potential, that maybe he can lure them, or if it's a woman, she. And how that girl responds makes a difference. If she's all embarrassed, looking at the floor, going, oh no, but no, he's going to keep at it. But if she stands up, and by the way, teach your girls and boys about self-confidence, self-respect, respecting other people. If she stands up and says, well, thanks a lot, but I'm not interested, and go away, or she turns back to her group, gets reassimilated into the group. And I used that example at our college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, when students are predominantly from small parts of Iowa. And a can goes up in the back of the room, and girl says, ooh, that happened to me in the mall. And I said, what'd you do? He's a college freshman. What'd you do? And she looked at me and she grinned and she said, sister, I'm not going to tell you what I said to him. That's exactly what she should have done. So, kids who generally from homes where there's decent communication between kids and parents, and you've all striven to give your kids good values, they're going to be okay. They're going to know what to do. But it gets tricky, and the internet and online stuff is tough because they are not always, the picture you see is not necessarily the person. And predators will change the pictures of the people that they're trying to sell also. So it's, well, it is darn ugly, no question. And victims often have, similar to what domestic violence victims, is a trauma bond with their predator. And people will say, why doesn't she just leave? Well, one, where is she going to go if her family doesn't take her back? She doesn't have skills. She doesn't have money. She doesn't have documents if she's not a US citizen. What does she do? Plus, she's been promised all these things. And initially, oh yeah, I'll be your dad or daddy, or I'll be your boyfriend, or I'll be whatever you need. And give them gifts and what have you. So it takes a lot of treatment and care once the victim becomes a survivor. That's the other thing. Vicki.
There we go. This feels like a huge problem. Like, I mean, well behind huge. And I don't know how everybody else feels. I know when I'm often confronted with huge problems like this, I think, well, God, where do we start? What do we do? What am I, how am I going to change things?
Mm-hmm.
If you could give one suggestion to each of us about how to help, what would that be?
The easy thing would be to pray. That's easy. We don't go for easy. What I would say to you is, one, learn what you can about the problem, about the issue, particularly as it's close to home. What's happening in Orlando or Liberty or Kansas City or Berkeley or anywhere? What is locally happening? Who is it you need to talk to so that they know what's happening? How do we prevent your children or your grandchildren, if you're a guardian, how do we help them know what it is so that they can be part the really obvious stuff you report to law enforcement. You had a lady say to me, I was in the library, I knew it was wrong, I didn't know what to do. So, call law enforcement and just say, this is what I'm seeing and this is where I saw it. And when we're talking about labor trafficking, Buy local, buy USA, buy fair trade certified, buy from some of these little companies, 10,000 villages. When I was doing affordable housing, we had 3,000 people on the waiting list for a Section 8 certificate. 3,000 families. That was back in the 80s. It's probably worse. You cannot look at the forest because it makes it impossible for you to work. You have to look at each tree. So we count every single success, no matter how small. Because if we don't, just throw our hands up and say, I can't do it. I met a woman early on, back in the early 2000s, who had been left for dead in a motel by the last person who purchased her. She didn't die. She was lucky. Her family took her back, welcomed her home. She put herself through nursing school, has an associate degree in nursing, and is working. It's a huge success. So you remind yourself about that. Others will say to us, God reached into hell and pulled me out. So, yeah. Dave has his hand up.
I love that little thing. It's cute, isn't it? Anyway, I just want to reiterate, just before I left Los Angeles, this was becoming very huge in neighborhoods because they were in metropolitan areas. And I imagine it's probably happening out in rural areas as well, maybe a little more clandestinely. But there's like a lot of grooming that goes on in the sense of they drive around neighborhoods where they know there are susceptible young people and children. And they start following. So basically what was happening just before I left was we were organizing to educate neighborhoods on what to look for as far as, cars driving, when you're noticing that there's this car that's constantly cruising around your neighborhood or so, start looking for. So I would just reiterate, go online and see if there are groups that are organized in your neighborhoods, wherever you live, if it's metropolitan or rural, because a lot of rural areas will have these farm labor camps, right behind the pine wall, the pine, those are things to notice too, I think. But I think that is one way for us to do it as well. And I really liked that in LA, we were really working on educating neighborhoods and having, meetings in parishes and, schools to start educating the neighborhood as to what to look for.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So we were in California, we were down, I think it was Watson, California, but we're driving south and they were picking strawberries, fields full of persons picking strawberries. Came around the corner in one of the roads and tucked back in there was the motel. Maybe innocent, maybe that's where the workers stayed, probably not. So, that's a little bigger, but it was a rural area. So, absolutely. Already doing some work.
Sister Jeannie, I can send to Lisa or Vicky for Lake Mary and Orlando. Catholic Charities has a section that they do with human trafficking. So I can send them the link with Christine's name and everything so that they can, if they wish, talk to them as to how to get that stuff done here.
That'd be absolutely a great way to do it. Catholic Charities, again, is a group you can trust. We have a number of out here. There are several church groups that we're a little hesitant to get too involved with because they want to convert the victims. And that's not what it's about. We're not going to evangelize the victims.
I would really just invite everyone, if you've got materials or links or things, send them to me, because as you can see, if you look in the little corner, we are recording this. So we're going to post this recording on Precious Blood on our website. So if you want to share it with other companions at a later date, you can. Thank you, Mary, for that great idea. And I can also include, if you've got links or resources you want to share, I can also include those as well.
I will send you some. And my public announcement, anybody who's around on the 29th of March, on the 8 o'clock hour of NBC Today, I'm doing a little presentation on human trafficking. I got interviewed last week, and I said to them, how did you find me? I mean, I'm this one little person in Kansas City. You had seen me on video somewhere. So all you people who are recording and videotaping me and posting it, I think that's how I got found. But anyway, it would be, they're doing a faith week, and they're beginning by honoring Catholic sisters who are doing human trafficking. And they will be including a survivor and a sister who's working with children in India who have been exploited. And then me, I'll be talking more about the US. So it'll be another little way to learn about human trafficking. Now, unless they change it, they said it'd be on at 8:10 in the morning.
Just remember us when you get big and famous and you're on all of these national
Right.
television stations.
A little unnerving. It was like, whoa.
Okay.
So when are you going to be on TV?
29th of March.
9th of March,
29th.
29th.
Last Monday of March. The first person I called was my president of my community.
Of course.
Guess what I agreed to do? She was fine. All she said was tell our communications people. Okay.
Ask for forgiveness instead of permission.
You got that one right. Sisters of Mercy are great at that. So any other comments, questions? If there's anything, Vicki has my email, so does Sandra and Lisa. So anybody wants to contact me, I have a e-list where I send out information, not on a real regular basis. I don't overwhelm it because you send too much stuff, nobody reads it. We learned that a long time ago. So if you want on my e-list, either send me an email or send one of them an email who can forward it to me. My email is pretty simple, actually. It's J. Christensen at sistersofmercy.org. We're pretty easy to find. And I can add you to the list. I have about 375 people I send to. So I appreciate your attention, your good questions, your comments. I appreciate being invited. We're always happy to talk about, we're happy to talk about human trafficking, not because it's a happy thing to talk about. It's an important thing for us to know.
Thank you, Sister Jeannie.
Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. And thanks, Vicki, for recording this also so that we can get, we can get all of this information out to as many people as we can. I know I just sent an email off to the companion saying, hey, maybe we take this on as the local level for us, for our group. Maybe there's more that we can do. So one person at a time, right, Sister Jeannie?
That's absolutely true. Each victim that we can help become a survivor is important. The other thing the victims will say to you is, please don't judge me because what I've been through is not who I am.
Kansas City's loss is Omaha's gain. I can't imagine you not being in Kansas City. You are somewhat of a fixture in the Catholic circles.
I've been down here this time for 21 years.
one of the things, it is a small circle, a small world here. I didn't know this. Jeanne and I actually served on a committee for the precious blood community, and I go to mass at my local parish, and there she is sitting in at the parish. We're parishioners at the same church, so we have all of these overlapping circles.
Yes, I've also been published. There's a lovely book out called Love Tenderly. So I've been published in that book. All right, Dave's got it. Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
Okay, any other last words or comments or?
I just had a quick question for Sister. How many people are being trafficked in, let's say, in Ohio or nationwide? I mean, what's the statistics on that?
Worldwide, there are 40 million,
Oh, geez.
roughly 300,000 in the US
Wow.
annually. And of those, I think they said a third of them are children.
Wow.
Yeah, they're ugly. It's ugly numbers. It's an ugly, ugly thing. And it intersects with everything. Our migrants at the border are at great risk. Environmental people who are displaced because of the environmental issues are at high risk. Any kind of natural disasters puts people at risk. So, yeah, it intersects with pretty much everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And they make a lot of money on it. That's even the worst part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say that the three biggest illegal money makers are drugs, arms dealing, and human trafficking.
Except the order currently is drugs, human trafficking, and guns.
Yeah.
And part of that's because human beings are a commodity to them. They can be bought and sold innumerable times, may become the highest sold, most frequently sold. Because if you buy drugs and sell them, then you still have to buy more. But with people, you can buy and sell them more than once until they're no longer useful, and then you discard them. I mean, it's totally in opposition to everything we believe in the dignity of human persons. And Pope Francis, bless his heart, has some great quotes. I have one. I was going to read it to you in the beginning and I forgot. Maybe we can close with this. How's that? In 2017, Pope Francis urged the world to show a greater commitment to fighting human trafficking, which he called a form of modern slavery, which, despite our conversation, the Pope made the appeal during his traditional Sunday prayer on the UN's World Day Against Trafficking. Francis said, every year, thousands of men, women, and children are innocent victims of labor exploitation and sex and organ trafficking. This is ugly. It is cruel. It is criminal. He called on the world to renew its commitment to battling this abhorrent plague, a form of modern slavery, and to pray that the traffickers change their hearts.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you all.
Amen.
Thank you.
Have a good, blessed
Thank you,
rest.
Sister.
Thank
And
you,
I just want to
sister.
say thank you to Lisa and Sandra and the Florida companions for letting us crash your party.
Anytime.
Anytime.
Yeah, I'm glad they threw a party. It's great.
Hey, Vicki,
Thank you all.
It's a
Hope to
pleasure
see
seeing
you
you all
soon. Hope
again.
to see everybody on the 25th.
I was wondering if in the future we might look at companion groups across the country and see what other kinds of programming that we can bring, we can share with one another. I think this is really a fantastic idea.
Mhm.
And I thank both Sandra and Lisa for working hard on this and bringing this and making it possible with Vicky's help. So thank you.
Thank you.
Arlene, it was Arlene and Sandra. I just have the mouthpiece.
Oh, sorry.
Hey.
We bashed Zoom during the pandemic, but there are some good things that have come out of it, and this is one of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody have a blessed week. Wonderful to see your faces.
Thank you.
See you all on the 25th.
Yeah, see you, come back, see you on the 25th.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.